This is TWIS, This Week in Science, episode number 471, recorded on Thursday, July 3rd, 2014. All the World's a Stage. Hey everyone, I am Dr. Kiki, and this is This Week in Science. We have a great show ahead for you, and tonight we're going to fill your head with dreams, with killer flu virus, and Shakespearean science. But first...
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. The following hour programming is brought to us in large part by the United States of America, a government designed in the age of reason, rationalism, and enlightenment. Founded by thinkers, inventors, and naturalists, a government that through the years has preferenced education and scientific pursuits over dogmatic adherence to the traditional loyalty of a king's religion. This break from past ways we still see employed in many parts of the world today, is the true strength of a nation that chose above all else life, liberty, and the pursuit of This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind I can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science to you, Kirsten.
Good science to you, Justin. So glad that we're both here. Blair is vacationing in the homeland. She's in Israel for the next 2 weeks, and so we will be sciencing without her. But, of course, we will try and bring the animal corner, a little bit of animalness to the show, because we can't do without that. Oh, how you doing, Justin? Good?
Terrible.
Terrible.
Like a baby treats a diaper.
Okay, I don't want to know. Welcome, everyone, to This Week in Science. We are going to have a wonderful show full of science, and today we've got a show filled with Shakespeare. We have an interview in the second half of the show with science writer Dan Falk, and he is going to be talking about his book, The Science of Shakespeare, a new look at the playwright's universe. There's a whole chapter on the science of Hamlet in here. I think we're going to have to
That's going to be fun.
dig deeply. Did you think Shakespeare was scientific? Well, there's a big fat book that says a lot of how he is, and we're going to talk to Dan about it in the second half of the show, and he just joined us. Hello, Dan. We're going to put you on hold for a while.
Sure.
Excellent. Glad to have you here. What do I have for the show today? I have news stories about killer viruses in laboratories. I've got some other stories about some bird blasting plants and some bone house wasps. Justin, what did you bring?
I've got plants have ears. Hearing plants. I've got a dreaming while awake study. Connections between psychedelic drugs and what happens when you're dreaming. And I have a couple others too. Some of what I'm looking over notes, it looks like we brought a lot of the same stories today.
Which is great.
But there's
we'll have
one
a lot
that
to
you've
talk
got
about.
I'm really excited to hear about. The Denisovian Tibetans.
That's right.
That's going to be totally awesome.
That'll be super awesome. So without further ado, let's jump into some of these stories, shall we? So first on the docket, I have a story that everybody in the social media world and the tech world has been talking about, and this is spread over to the world of academics and proper format and ethics for doing scientific studies by tech companies. Has Facebook crossed over the line? It seems that they may have done a study. Well, they did a study. They published a study involving a Cornell researcher and a UCSF researcher looking at how manipulating users' feeds on Facebook affected the user's mood. And so actually manipulating people through their feeds. the problem with this is that Facebook relied on their contract, which we all kind of click and go, yeah, users, whatever, I give away my rights just so I can use your social media application. And they basically said they had institutional review board permission to do this through the universities they were associated with. However, it turns out that they don't have explicit permission. They never had explicit review of their methods for this study, and the review board did not explicitly review the study and give it a stamp of approval. It just wasn't declined. And so institutional review boards were put in place sometime around the 70s, 60s, 70s, in order to make sure we didn't have studies affecting humans that were ethically questionable, that people weren't doing crazy things to people without people's explicit consent. And Facebook is falling back on the, well, everybody clicked the accept users' rights, accept the contract, the Bill of Rights for Facebook, and so we get to do whatever we want with the feed that we feed to people.
There's got to be some meeting of the mind there too. Usually those end user agreements are agreeing that you're not going to be holding them liable for stuff that happens using the product, that sort of thing. If they've expanded it out to where they're taking your firstborn, secondborn child, I think that, we can agree that there was no meeting of the mind. But how bad was it? How bad were they manipulating people? Like, what were they actually doing?
So in the study, what they did is they manipulated people's feeds to be either mostly positive or negative, and then see how that affected the people's posts for a certain duration of time. And so what they found, the results confirm that positive or negative emotions can be transmitted through social media, where usually we think that emotion is something that has to be transferred through physical contact or actual face-to-face communication or vocal transmission. Now we are finding that emotions, positive and negative, can be transmitted just via posts in a social media context. What they did is manipulated to basically try and get people, manipulated the feed, made them more positive, hoping that people would become happier, made all the posts more negative, hoping that the users would become sadder, more negative feeling themselves, and that's what happened. In one part of that, it's like, well, exactly how much were people's moods affected? Mood, we know, is affected by time on social media networks like Facebook, but exactly what is going on there? So what really did they do wrong? That's the question at hand here. There was no actual consent by any of the users, the hundreds of thousands of users of Facebook that they manipulated to be manipulated within the study. And they were manipulated. It turns out that they were made more happy and more sad. And if somebody who's already depressed is made more sad, could that potentially push them towards more depressive events? So there's a big question there about how far that kind of manipulation could go, and that is it okay? Is it not okay? And so there's a big debate occurring right now within the technology community, the scientific community, and it actually looks like that the UK, the British government, might go after Facebook, that there might be some legal ramifications arising from this.
Now, do they have a version? But they had a version of it where they just showed people positive stuff, right?
Yes.
Those people are fine, right?
Those people are fine. So
So
we've got at least one group that's great.
Those people went and made that marriage proposal. Those people went and took that. Those people went out and did something with their day. Happy. Well, it's a little bit depressing, really, to think that we can be manipulated by something like this. But on the other hand, I just feel like news does this.
News does it too. Negative headlines.
News is it bleeds, it leads kind of stuff,
Yeah.
People
But
are
it's and
manipulable, and the response that we give when we are manipulated makes people want to do it again.
yeah. I don't know. It's interesting, and the ramifications, the ethical ramifications, are just interesting to consider. And I think it is something that people need to be aware of when they are agreeing to these social media contracts. What exactly are you getting yourself into, and could you potentially be manipulated even more than we currently are manipulated by media? And then along the similar lines of ethical aspects of research, there's a report of a researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison who we've talked about him before. He is working on flu viruses and mutating these flu viruses within ferrets in a level 3 biosecurity facility laboratory. To study swine flu and the Spanish flu to see whether we can find out what makes these flu viruses become killers, where they kill hundreds of thousands of people versus, oh, they just get people a little bit sick. You know, what makes them spread rapidly through the population versus, oh, they just get a couple of people sick and it not really go very far. It's very important research. The laboratory at the University of Wisconsin-Madison is one of a few in the world that are pursuing research of this type. There are several biosecurity facilities that investigate viruses and pathogenic particles of all types that are extremely dangerous to humankind. And so this is not research that is taken into lightly. There are all sorts of review processes that go into allowing this research to take place. But there is a question now at play because the researcher Yoshihiro Kawaoka has reportedly created a virus that would enable the 2009 H1N1 swine flu virus to completely evade the protection of our immune systems.
Yeah.
So,
and at the same time that was announced, it was also announced that he is now to be called the Supreme Commander of Planet Earth.
right.
Lest he release this.
Lest he release this. And so the question arises, and I was looking at different posts online. There are people within the Science on Google Plus community who are discussing some articles that were put into the media on outlets like The Independent and the RT, Russian Times. Or Russia Today, I believe is the title of that media outlet, which they are calling sensationalistic because they call into question the value of the research. And these scientists on Science on Google Plus are saying that these media articles are fear-mongering and trying to produce fear within the population of people who don't know enough about virology to understand that this is really important research and there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. And I'm thinking there's a disconnect here, and that this is a perfect opportunity for the scientific community to step up and explain to the public and exactly why this kind of research is important and how we are going to keep this killer virus in the lab when there have been reports, according to people like Nicholas Evans from The Broken Spoke and Maren McKenna over at Wired, who are saying that accidents have happened and that it's looking as though the 1977 flu, the 1977 global flu pandemic that emerged, it was an H1N1 flu strain in 1977, that came from a lab, most likely. These things do escape. Humans are fallible. We make mistakes regardless of security systems that are in place. So there is a bioethical conversation that needs to take place that I don't think is happening because the scientists are saying this is important, don't question us. There's no split within the scientific community as to whether or not this is important or valuable or how we're going to do it, when actually there is. There are people publishing, there are a small percentage of the scientific community, but not the entire scientific community is completely behind this kind of stuff. So I don't know. I think there is a conversation that needs to be had, and this is a teaching moment, and this is a place where people need to know that there are laboratories where this research is taking place and that sometimes accidents happen. And so there are potential risks. Is it worth it? Do we want to fund this research? It is tax dollars that go toward funding this research. So people need to know. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just went on a total rant soapbox right there.
Well, soapbox a little bit about this sort of thing. You know, I'm always, we were talking about this earlier, I'm always thinking back to the level 4 lab that they were planning on, or they were trying to get built in Davis.
Yeah, it didn't end up being built, but...
Huh?
It didn't end up being built there.
Correct,
but,
correct.
Yeah.
It ended up getting voted down or shot down or whatever. But I happened at that time to have a chance to talk to a guy who was retired but used to be the head of the biology department at UC Davis. And he was against it. And this is a guy whose life work had, this is a lifelong scientist who'd worked in these labs and he especially because I'm retired. This was the thing. Especially because now I'm not there. I don't trust it. And I wouldn't trust it because there's too much that can go wrong, that does go wrong. And it was almost literally like because the kids today can't be trusted to maintain a lab with that level of security.
Yeah,
that's kind of how he put it.
Yeah, it's interesting here that one of the comments that came back to me said on Google Plus, I entered into a conversation about this topic, and one of the comments that came back was, I've worked around virologists at several academic centers for years. I've never heard of a split in the scientific community or of accidents or leaks either. Where I believe just recently there was an anthrax release that was unintended, and there are examples of all sorts of accidental leaks from these places. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And so we can't say there is absolutely no risk, and to suggest that there's absolutely no risk and that the science is more important than discussing the risk is irresponsible. Anywho, you want to talk about Denisovans?
Yes. Tell me.
So there's a combination of mutations. Looking at some bones from the Denisovans, they've gotten actually not a small amount, but these small amount of bones have led to a large amount of DNA that we have an understanding of Denisovans, and we're getting a better picture of their place in the evolution of humans. Denisovans weren't completely isolated. They interbred with modern humans, and modern populations having the most Denisovan DNA are around Southern Asia, some Pacific islands, but there's a group closer to Siberia called the Tibetans, and they have a number of genetic mutations that allow them to adapt and exist in the high elevations of the Tibetan Plateau. Studies have identified a gene called EPAS1 as a candidate for helping them have a slight change in their red blood cells that allow them to hold more oxygen in their red blood cells, creating more red blood cells so they have more viscous blood. They looked at 40 Tibetans, 40 of their close relatives, the Han Chinese, 130,000 bases surrounding the gene EPAS1, and there are lots of differences between the two populations in this one region of DNA, and it turns out that there are a lot more similarities to Denisovans. So we're finding that this Tibetans, we're trying to figure out how the DNA ended up showing up in Tibetans. They looked at other genomes, but a search of the databases found that it was the Denisovans, and that was pretty much it. The 5 changes found to the Tibetans the Denisovans had. So
Wow.
Denisovans led to the Tibetans being able to live at high altitudes. So now the question is, why did the Denisovans have those mutations in the first place? And I guess they would have been living in those high altitudes before modern humans turned up. And that living in those higher altitudes probably led them to make those adaptations first.
Yeah.
But we don't know. It's a very interesting question.
That is totally right.
Yeah.
Then we got Neanderthals and Denisovans back there. We kind of figure out how these red deer cave people get in there too. Let's see if
Oh
we-
yeah, and then there's some new evidence of some red deer hair that I think is going to be giving more information. I didn't have time to look at that study well enough, but there's some kind of hair woven into clothing that's been found at ancient sites that might give us information about these red deer cave people.
That would be totally awesome.
Yeah. Tell me about dreaming awake, or whatever story you feel like moving into it.
Okay, so this is research showing how there's a similar pattern of activity when we're dreaming in the brain as there is when we are on LSD or magic mushrooms. This is kind of an interesting thing. It says both can profoundly alter the way we experience the world, but little is known about what physically happens in the brain. New research published in the Human Brain Mapping has examined the brain effects of the psychedelic chemical in magic mushrooms, psilocybin, and using data from brain scans of volunteers who have been injected with the drug. I don't know why they didn't just eat the mushrooms.
Eat the mushrooms in the first place.
Yeah, like, we're going to take the mushroom,
Like a
extract
little
it, but I guess
linguine,
they could
little
control the
mushroom
dose.
pasta.
I guess they could control, I suppose, the dosages better that way. It seems
Yeah,
like
I would think so. Yeah.
A study found that under psilocybin activity and in the more primitive brain network linked to emotional thinking became more pronounced. With several different areas in this network, such as the hippocampus and anterior cingulate cortex, active at the same time. This pattern of activity is similar to the pattern observed in people who are dreaming. Conversely, volunteers who had taken psilocybin had more disjointed and uncoordinated activity in the brain network that is linked to high-level thinking, including self-consciousness. Psychedelic drugs are unique among other psychoactive chemicals in that their users often describe expanded consciousness, including enhanced associations, vivid imagination, and dreamlike states. To explore the biological basis of this experience, researchers analyzed brain imaging data from 15 volunteers who were given it intravenously. What we have done with this research is to begin to identify the biological basis of the reported mind expansion associated with psychedelic drugs, says Dr. Robin K. Hart Harris, Department of Medicine, Imperial College London. I was fascinated to see the similarities between the pattern of brain activity in the psychedelic state and the pattern of brain activity during dream sleep, especially as both involve the primitive areas of the brain linked to emotions and memory. People often describe taking psilocybin as producing a dreamlike state, and our findings have, for the first time, provided a physical representation for this experience in the brain. So, being on psilocybin is like dreaming awake.
Like dreaming awake.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing about this study that I thought was really interesting is, it's first off unusual for researchers to do this kind of research. Research on
Because it's
hallucinogenic drugs or any kind of drugs is usually hard to come by and not incredibly well respected by the scientific community as a whole, I believe. But it is interesting to find out exactly how these kinds of compounds affect the brain. How do they turn certain things off, diminish activity in some areas while heightening activity in others? Why do you get the feelings that you get while you are using certain compounds? So it's really interesting to see Also, if there are other compounds that we can create similar to these natural compounds that could maybe help people get through psychological issues, or maybe affect different neurological disorders, allowing them to heighten activity in certain areas of the brain that would normally be diminished. So,
right, and there was therapeutic
interesting
attempts, and with some success back in the 50s, before this became a narcotic under some legal scrutiny. So there was a long time ago attempts to use this. In fact, there was one study that Aldous Huxley was quoting in Brave New World Revisited, where recidivism rates for prisoners who were given LSD was extremely low, which I always pictured as, yeah, if you'd given somebody a psychoactive drug like that and yet they were in jail for the entire duration, that would probably make them not want to go there ever again.
Ever again.
Ever again.
Strange kind of therapy. Yes. Well, I think that we have been at this for just about a half hour. We've got a bunch more stories, but we also have an amazing interview coming up with our guest, Dan Falk, the author of I was going to say the Shakespeare of Science, but which maybe he was, but the Science of Shakespeare. So stay with us for just a few moments, because we're going to take a brief sojourn for some commentary, and we'll be right back with more This Week in Science. Audible.com is the leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 titles in their library. All sorts of genres, periodicals to books, but all in the audio form. So you can download them, put them on whatever device you want, either sit and listen in a particular place or take them with you. Listen on the go, learn or be entertained. So many great things to choose from. And we have found lots of science-y books in the Audible library, and we know that you can too. So why don't you go try Audible out today? And if you do, you can use the link that I'm about to give to you. You'll get a free audiobook download. So head on over to audiblepodcast.com/TWIS. It's audiblepodcast.com/TWIS. You get a free audiobook download just for signing up. Whatever you choose. Maybe Science of Shakespeare is in there? I don't know. We should look for it. And we get a little kickback. So it makes Audible happy, makes you happy, makes us happy. Everybody's happy. Win, win, win. audiblepodcast.com/TWIS. Go check it out today. TWIS also has merchandise that you might enjoy. If you want to wear our swag, head on over to twis.org. We have a Zazzle store link in our main header bar. It says Zazzle, the Zazzle store. And we've got hats and t-shirts and buttons and all sorts of fun stuff over there. Buy it. You'll like it. And so will we. TWIS also is mainly supported by listeners like you. Your donations pay for contractors we want to hire, bandwidth, fun things we want to do for the show, hosting, lots of things. You pay for it. You help us do this, and we appreciate any amount that you can give, from $2 to $200, whatever. You make this show possible. We currently accept donations in two ways. First, we have PayPal donation buttons all over our website. So if you go to twis.org and just look around for the little buttons that say PayPal on them, you can donate using PayPal. PayPal's not your thing. We have started a new program called Patreon. Patreon is kind of like Kickstarter, but for media producers. So you get something for helping us out and giving us something. So if you head over, I think we have the link. The links are on most of our show pages, but patreon.com/thisweekinscience. If you want to go there right now and check out the fun gifts that we'll give you for donating at various levels. Patreon, Patreon.com youtube.com/thisweekinscience. It's great. Whatever your preference, go to the website, listen to the most recent episode, comment on the show, and make a donation, right? But if you can't afford a donation, don't worry. You can still help us out. Everyone can help us out if you want to. We can always use your help to get more people listening to TWIS or watching us on YouTube. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Tell your friends to subscribe to us on YouTube or subscribe to our podcast RSS feed. Share us on your social networks. You're doing it for science. It'd be pretty awesome. Tell people to tune into TWIS. We thank you for your support. We really could not do this without you.
Can't explain the things you heard with more than intuition. The line of reason shows the way to go.
And we're back with more This Week in Science.
That's right. It's This Week in Science. And Dan, I muted you, and I'm having trouble unmuting you from my end. So if you would be so kind to unmute yourself so that we can actually have a conversation. I believe you hit your microphone button. There we go.
How about that? Did that work?
That worked. Excellent. 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 Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. This is This Week in Science. We are joined tonight by Dan Falk. He's the author of The Science of Shakespeare, a new look at the playwright's universe. Recently out and quite enjoyable. If you like Shakespeare and you like science, this is the perfect melding of the two. Dan is a freelance journalist. He's an author. He's a broadcaster specializing in science stories. So we like science stories. We're glad to have you here to talk to us about all of this.
Intriguing title.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
No, we've got a little bit of robot sound coming from your end. Would it be possible for you to, what would you do, unplug and plug back in again? Unplug your headset?
I'll try it, sure.
Yeah. See if it works. And then we might have to go to the settings again just to make sure that it recognizes it.
So I don't know if, is this working? Can you hear me?
Much better. Yes. You sound, sometimes these USB headsets make you sound like a robot.
I can hear you, so
Yes.
that's good.
You sound great. Much better. All right.
Nope.
So once again, thank
now
you
I
for
don't hear
joining us. Oh, we went away.
Okay. I can hear
Thank
both
you
of
for
you.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
So how do you come to the subject of the
Yeah, my
science
pleasure to be
of
here.
Shakespeare? How did this come about? Where did this idea come from?
Yeah, I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, darn it. We've got a delay. So what we're going to try to do.
Well, there's a few different paths that led me here, but
Yeah, we have a delay. I'm so sorry. There's a delay between you and us. Would it be possible for you to log out and then try and rejoin the call? So hang up and try calling back in.
Yeah, it's a good one.
yeah,
It's a good,
I'll
like,
give it a
minute.
try.
Thank you.
sure,
I'm so
one moment.
sorry. Sometimes, for those of you watching us live, you know that we get these little delay issues.
Interwebs.
The interwebs. And we will start over, and hopefully he will be back, and there will be no further problems. This is what's going to happen. I'm going to think positively. I'm going to invite positive into my life, because all of that stuff works. I don't know about that. The Scion effect. Yes, Salosinten. Salosinten? Salosinten? Wait, beer fridge? What are you guys talking about a beer fridge for in the chat room? Yeah, Jackson Fly's been asleep. I'll go back to my inbox. Everyone's behind us. The chat room's behind us too.
Really? Wow.
Mm-hmm.
You and I are in sync, right? 1, 2.
3.
Yeah, we're there.
Yeah, okay. Here comes Dan joining the call again. Let's try this again.
Yeah, well, I'm hearing you. I'm
yes.
Not in real time. Yes.
I believe in real time, and I don't see you. I mean, I see you in the corner of my screen. I don't see you big, but that's not a problem. I mean, I still see you in the little picture, so that's fine.
Okay, great. Awesome. We are connected. Let's hope this connection stays with us and keeps us in just about real time for the rest of the show. I will do this for the editing of once again. Dan, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Now, Justin, you had a question. What were you wondering?
So yeah, very intrigued by the title, and I'm curious how you came about tackling the subject of science within the world of Shakespeare.
Yeah, well, so there's a couple of paths that led me there. The starting point, I guess, is that I've always been kind of a fan. Can you still hear me? I just got an error message on.
Yeah, we got you.
We can still hear you.
Okay. So one path is that I've been a Shakespeare fan, not at all a Shakespeare expert, but an amateur enthusiast of Shakespeare's plays. I always enjoyed going to them, as I did since I was a little kid, and Mom and Dad were nice enough to sort of take me to Shakespeare productions when I was still quite young, and I would I'd go around quoting lines from Macbeth or Hamlet and so on. But later, as a grown-up and as a science journalist, I couldn't help noticing that Shakespeare just happens to be around when all these really interesting developments in what we would now call science are just beginning to happen. So modern science, well, I mean, that didn't really exist in Shakespeare's world, but still, you look back at this time period, Shakespeare and Galileo were born in the same year. Shakespeare was around well before he retired, so to speak. Galileo was already aiming his telescope at the night sky, and of course Vesalius had published a book on human anatomy. So there are all these things going on, and yeah, so it was sort of the birth of science. And Shakespeare, whether he sort of deals with it or not, I mean, that's maybe something else we can talk about, but Shakespeare is there while this is happening. And then finally, earlier this year, Shakespeare had a birthday. He turned 450, and I thought, hey, perfect time. Well, editors publishers like anniversaries. Everybody likes anniversaries. So what better time than now to write a book about possible connections between Shakespeare and the world of science?
So you say possible connections, but is there any direct evidence that he was possibly talking with his contemporaries or, learning about the things that these people at the same time were investigating and somehow, or, I'm sure people are people. We have conversations. There was no water cooler in Shakespeare's time, but who was he talking to and how did he incorporate it? Is there evidence?
Yeah, remember, usually the water wasn't even safe to drink anyway.
Right.
You were better off with beer. Yeah, so that's of course a terrific question. Now, I don't want anyone to misunderstand me. I mean, Shakespeare was not a scientist. He was a playwright and an actor and a poet, and those were his priorities. That's what he was interested in. But he was also very interested in the human condition, and that means being interested not just in how people function, but in how people relate to the world around them, and that includes things like, well, how do we picture our place in the universe, So then, perhaps it's a bit indirect, but this gets you into questions of astronomy, for example. Now, it's complicated because, astronomy and astrology were very much intertwined in Shakespeare's time. Chemistry didn't exist, but there was alchemy. There are a lot of strange, or by today's standards, strange ways of thinking, but there were also, as I hinted at earlier, some more modern ways of seeing things too, like Copernicus's theory, the heliocentric theory in which the planets go around the sun. This was a new-ish idea, sort of a redo of an idea that the ancient Greeks had come up with, but didn't really get much traction at the time. So that was making a comeback, and as I say later on, Galileo would aim his telescope at the stars. So did Shakespeare have some awareness of these issues? That, of course, is the really interesting question. And I think, well, it depends how much time we have, but I want to give you a two-part answer to that. I think one thing is that he was interested in a lot of these things. So let's just separate that for a moment of how much from a question of how much he knew. We know he was we know he was interested because when you crack open a Shakespeare play, the first thing you notice, well, not the first thing. I mean, maybe there's all the sexual innuendo. There's all, I don't know what you might notice first. There's a lot of killing. There's a lot of regicide and a lot of people getting their heads chopped off and stuff in the history plays. But one of the things you notice is that people are often referencing the sun and the moon. In Romeo and Juliet, there's this long scene where they're trying to figure out, is it the sun, or which one is it? Is it the sun or is it the moon? Are we in trouble?
I just had my thumb open to that page, actually. I was going to ask you about that specifically. So there's Theseus, who's, here lies the east. Doth not the day break here? Casca says, no. Cinna says, oh, pardon, sir, it doth. And yon gray lines that fret the clouds are messengers of day. Casca says, you shall confess that you are both deceived. Here, as I point my sword, the sun arises, which is a great way growing on the south, weighing the youthful season of the year. Some 2 months hence, up higher toward the north, he first presents his fire, and the high east stands as the capital, directly here.
Yeah, so now that passage is from Julius Caesar, but
Julius Caesar, sorry, yes.
That's okay. It echoes the argument is actually very much the same, or strongly parallels the one in Romeo and Juliet. And the fact
you have another one later in Romeo and Juliet, and that was the one I was looking for. Yeah.
For sure, yeah. So Shakespeare clearly thought his audience would know what he was talking about, first of all, and be entertained by this. I mean, in Julius Caesar, it's a very dramatic scene because it's the night before the assassination, and the conspirators have gathered in the garden. I think it's Brutus's garden, and they're all there, and they're just going over their plans for the next day when they're gonna kill Caesar. But instead of talking about that, they take this 90-second break to argue about where on the horizon the sun is going to rise, as if it was astronomy 101 class and a couple of undergraduates were arguing about it. So it's very peculiar, you might say, that is injected in there, and scholars actually sort of debate as to what role that serves. But you take any of the plays and you find these sort of funny references to, as I say, the sun, the moon, but also planets, eclipses. Famously, at the beginning of King Lear, there's a reference to solar and lunar eclipses, but elsewhere too. They come up in Hamlet also, and comets and meteors. So these things are scattered throughout Shakespeare's works. So I don't think there's any question that he found them very interesting and worth discussing. There's also issues to do with medicine. I mean, Shakespeare's knowledge of medicine seems to have been pretty good. In the book, I actually focus more on astronomy and cosmology for various reasons. One of them is I just happen to find it interesting. But then we have the second question, how much did Shakespeare know? And that's tricky, but we are pretty sure he was an avid reader. I mean, he was reading Montaigne, he was reading Hollinshead. We know because he was, I don't want to say plagiarized, but what's a more polite word? He was inspired by these various writers that he was devouring. So could he have read some of the popular science of the day? I think it's very possible. In England, I mentioned Galileo, Tycho Brahe. These, Galileo is Italian, Tycho Brahe was Danish. But in England, there are people less famous. I mean, to us today, but Thomas Digges, John Dee. John Dee was sort of a magician / scientist / conjurer. He's a bit of everything. He's said to have maybe been the inspiration for the Prospero character in The Tempest, and also maybe in Harry Potter. Is it Voldemort? I get my wizards. I haven't read the Harry Potter series, but the wizard in the elder of the various wizards in Harry Potter. At any rate, so
Voldemort's the bad one.
Okay, well, is there a good wizard?
Yeah.
we don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
But at any rate, yeah, so that's John Dee, perhaps a lesser known, certainly a lesser known figure than either Copernicus or Galileo. But yeah, there was. Well, let me just mention. I mean, Thomas Digges wrote a popularization of the Copernican theory in English. It was the first book about this heliocentric theory written by an Englishman for an English audience. That's kind of cool. And this happens about a decade before Shakespeare sits down to work on his plays. And he could have come across that.
Yeah.
I mean, I could go on and on, but I think there's a case you can make that Shakespeare had more awareness of these discoveries than we usually imagine.
More awareness, yeah. I imagine the society at that point in time, the population's still very small, but people who are in, like Shakespeare was thought to be a nobleman, probably running in high circles of the well-to-do. But I've heard it argued that he was a nobleman and that he wrote as someone else, that he tried to pass himself off as not an educated nobleman.
Are we getting into the conspiracy theories here?
Yeah.
So I don't actually support those ideas myself. They are fun to talk about. I mean, we can certainly talk about them. My best guess is that Shakespeare actually was Shakespeare, and that he was the actor from Stratford, and didn't go to university. And this is also what Shakespeare scholars believe.
At this point, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it is fun to speculate.
But more interesting though is who his audience was, because his audience wasn't just the noble set. I mean, his audience.
Oh,
was
absolutely. Yeah,
anybody.
absolutely. So, right. I mean, the people going to the theater, and we should remember that back then there was no internet, and there was no cable television, and there was no Twitter, and so on. And the theater was the big public entertainment. Now, you could also stay after the show for the bear baiting or some other horrific display of violence or something. But the big sort of fun for the whole family event was going to see a play, and as many as 3,000 people at a time would go to the Globe Theater and see whatever it was, the latest thing by Marlowe or Johnson or William Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, so you mentioned the nobleman theory. I mean, that is one of the various, sorry, I hate to say this, but one of the sort of fringy ideas that's put out there. But the standard view, the standard view that Shakespeare scholars accept is that he was just a regular guy. Now, he was very bright and very curious, and went to his local grammar school in Stratford, where he picked up some Latin and some Greek. Read his Ovid and his Horace and so on. Moved to London. I mean, he was literate. That's already a step up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're way ahead of the game if you know how to read. So he could go to the bookstalls behind St. Paul's Cathedral, and he could read Montaigne's essays. They had just been translated from French into English by a guy named John Florio. So we think he devoured that. I mentioned Holinshed's Chronicles. So there was a lot for him to sink his teeth into, and then use it. Not, he was not. He was himself not at all a science popularizer, right? So I don't want anyone to think that I'm trying to portray Shakespeare as the sort of Neil deGrasse Tyson of the Elizabethan age. Like here's what you ought to know about the solar system, right? So it's not like that, but.
He's like a guy who maybe watched the Discovery Channel and learned a few things, and then was like, "Oh, that fits in. I can put this in this conversation here, and I can tie it in, and it's just cool."
Exactly, it's cool, and it can move the action forward, or it can help contrast one character with another. I mean, that's something he does to advantage in, for example, King Lear. There's one of my very favorite scenes. It's where Gloucester and Edmund are arguing in King Lear. Not exactly arguing, but they're talking about what the ramifications are of these recent eclipses in the sun and moon that have been seen. And Gloucester presents a very superstitious view. He's saying, well, these late eclipses portend no good to us. And he goes on. It's a very long sort of a soliloquy. Well, it's not a soliloquy because Edmund is standing next to him, but saying, fathers are torn from their sons and nations fall apart and empires crumble, blah, blah, blah. And he's very upset because he thinks these eclipses of the sun and moon are really causing the turmoil that he sees around him on Earth. And then he leaves. He walks out of the room, and Edmund, who happens to be his illegitimate child, so if I'm allowed to say the B word, Edmund is the bastard child, right? There's also the brother who's legitimate. Anyway, Edmund is very skeptical, and as soon as Gloucester has left the room, he sort of turns to, well, we would say the camera, or he turns to the audience in the Globe Theatre and says, "Oh, this is the excellent foppery of the world that we," and I'm just paraphrasing here, but we blame our misfortunes on the stars, when usually it's just our own fault. How silly it is to look to the patterns in the heavens for the things that have gone wrong down here. So it's very interesting that Shakespeare at the very least was aware of these different worldviews, and the passage in King Lear doesn't really tell us what side Shakespeare was on, although I like to imagine that just to phrase it so harshly, to attack the superstitious view, means he has to have the quote modern view. That's how I see it. I see Shakespeare as the stand-in for Edmund in that scene. But is that his main goal? Well, not really. His main goal is to tell you a really gripping tale of families torn apart, and oh my goodness, there's 3 daughters, and now they have to prove which one loves them the most, and and the kingdom is divided, and looks like pretty soon everybody's going to die, and if you stick around to Act 5, yeah, pretty much everybody is dead by the time it's over. But it's a gripping tale, and the science, and I'm being a bit anachronistic by using the word science, but these elements of science that find their way in, yeah, it's just what you were saying a moment ago, that he thought, all right, this is cool, this is cool, and it will help me move the story along.
Yeah, or at least give characters a little bit more depth. So like Edmund would be, you'd know that he is that kind of, a little bit cranky and a little bit dismissive of those particular, those particular kind of spiritual kind of views, as opposed to something more scientific.
I wonder if it had to come, if he had to be the bastard for that to come from him, in a way.
Yeah.
You can't. Of course, you can't prove it, and you can get a little bit carried away with this kind of thing, right? It's very, very tricky, and Shakespeare scholars usually stop short of trying to make these kinds of inferences because you just can't prove anything. It's all, it eventually becomes a little bit pie in the sky, right? So when you'll have people saying that, oh, Shakespeare talks about Italy so well in several of the plays, does that mean he visited Italy? Well, the problem is there's no evidence that he ever left England, right? In fact, there's no evidence that he ever was anywhere besides Stratford, the town he grew up in, and London. I mean, if he did a little half-day trip to Richmond or someplace in Essex or whatever, that's fine. But I mean, that he went to Italy is kind of crazy, right? So it's very awkward to take the plays or the poems, and the poems are the sonnets are especially tricky because some of them sound autobiographical, and it's very tempting, right? When he talks about the dark lady, then suddenly you're thinking, oh well, I guess that's one of his lovers, or so it's very, very tricky.
But I kind of meant it more in the context of if he would get any sort of heat or pressure from the Church of England for espousing this view, having it come from the mouth of a bastard who's obviously going to hell anyways, right?
Oh, that's a very good question. It's a good question. No, I don't think there was that kind of trouble. Now, the plays, I mean, everything that was presented on the stage did go past the government censors. So that part is true. You could not say bad things about the current monarch or her family. Absolutely. There's Elizabeth up until 1603, I think, and then James takes over. So you could not say anything bad about them. But other than that, I think there was a lot of freedom. Sex and violence were not a problem. And what a lot of people, well, there was one blogger somewhere who got a little antsy about this after he read my book, that made it, trying to make it sound like, well, the Copernican theory was highly controversial, and therefore it's a very risque thing to say anything that might support it openly. So I don't actually say that in the book. So it's, but you know how things are on the blogosphere. People read things different ways and get a little carried away. I mean, yes, Galileo later in the 1630s. Remember, Shakespeare was dead by this time. So in Italy, a Catholic country where the Vatican was a very big deal, Galileo got into trouble, and not just for supporting the heliocentric theory, but for disobeying orders from the Pope and that sort of thing. It's a whole story into itself. In England, there just wasn't anything like that, and so I've read some of the what historians have said about what was and wasn't controversial in this period. Stuff about whether the sun went around the Earth or the Earth went around the sun. It just wasn't. It was not likely to get you into trouble. But that doesn't mean that it's not interesting. It's still absolutely fascinating whether Shakespeare had some awareness of this idea, whether there could be little hints about it in certain places in the plays, and that's what this fellow Peter Usher claims. And some of his ideas are maybe a little bit extravagant, but it's a very interesting idea. So Usher has read Hamlet in a particular way that he imagines that there are little sort of hints about the heliocentric theory. I don't know if that's really the case or not, but it's very interesting to think about. And there are a lot of, we were talking a little earlier about how Shakespeare came to some of these ideas, and can I take a moment or two to talk about the significance of Montaigne?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Montaigne was a French statesman and essayist, and he lived about 50 years before Shakespeare. I guess the only thing we remember him for today are these essays where he's very forthright. It's almost like a stream of consciousness, and he talks about war and death and sex and what people believe in different nations, and he talks about his cat, and it's basically almost everything that crossed his mind. He talks about the cannibalism that he heard happens in Brazil. So just anything that he thought was interesting, he writes down in his essays. And we know Shakespeare read it because Shakespeare, again, borrows from it. There's a very famous passage in The Tempest that borrows from it almost verbatim from one of Montaigne's essays. But what's very interesting, and I think hasn't received much attention, is the fact that Montaigne, at a certain point, talks about the Copernican theory. That's really interesting. It doesn't go on for very long. It's just a few paragraphs. But Montaigne says, well, back in the old days, people believed the ancient Greek idea. Today, some people believe this Polish guy Copernicus, who says it's the other way around. And I'm paraphrasing, but this is pretty close to what he says. But who knows if in 1,000 years there might be a whole other idea about how it works. So that's very interesting. I think Montaigne is very far ahead of his time. It's a very, very philosophically sophisticated way of looking at things. We know Shakespeare read that. Well, I mean, if Shakespeare read every page, then he read that. He might have done what I do in the bookstore, which is you just kind of flip through it and only read the juicy bits. But if he read every page, then he read that, and that means Shakespeare knew about the Copernican system. Doesn't mean he believed it. We don't even know that Montaigne endorsed it. We just know that Montaigne was conscious of these competing worldviews and thought it was interesting enough to write about. So, between books, this sort of community of learned people. I mean, not that London was a small town, it was a big city, but the people who had interesting things to say, I think, all knew each other. Yeah, it's possible that Shakespeare got some of these ideas into his head, and it's just really interesting to think about.
I think it's fascinating to think about. We know how people are influenced by the stuff around us now, and there's so much information now. But like I mentioned earlier, it's just a much smaller population in Shakespeare's time, and so the people that you're around, you don't necessarily see them all the time, but you've got your social group and maybe Shakespeare was going out reading these essays by Montaigne, maybe going out to dinner at a restaurant because he had a bit of cash, went out to dinner and overheard some conversations. That's
Yeah, I think it's very possible. I mean, a scene. It's a scene that I just sort of invent because we don't know how Shakespeare spent his free time. But I imagine that he's there in a pub, a tavern, and he's with his actor buddies because who else would he go to the tavern with? He'd go with his friends who were the other actors. And if one of the other writers showed up, that's great. They'd invite him over to the table. And then, maybe some travelers who had recently come back from Italy just happened to be there. And it's late 1610 or maybe it's 1611, and Galileo has just published his little book. It's an illustrated book about the things he had seen through his telescope, and it was a bestseller. The first edition sold out within, I don't know, a matter of days. And people were mailing it, sending it to colleagues in different countries. I think it was the English ambassador in Venice sent it to King James within a few days of it being released. So of course we have no idea if Shakespeare ever saw or touched it himself, but I think he probably would have, because I think all it would take is, he's in a tavern, he hears somebody saying, "Oh yeah, I got back from Italy, there's this book, people are talking about it, here, look, I've got it in my saddlebag, it's a little book, but look at these pictures,"
Right.
and he overhears someone saying, whatever the word telescope doesn't get coined for another year or two, but, this perspective tube or glass, and I just think his ears would perk up. Not just because they're talking about science, Shakespeare wasn't a scientist, but just because they were saying something interesting. And if there was something interesting going on in the world, I bet he wanted to know about it and learn more. And so I sort of imagine all he would have to do at that point was either, say, "Excuse me, can I take a look at that?" Or the next morning he could just walk over to the bookstalls behind St. Paul's Cathedral. They flourished there actually right up until the Second World War. And grab a copy for himself.
Or just flip through
it's really interesting or just flip through it. But this one with the pretty pictures, and it was a smaller book, only about 75 pages or so. I don't know how much it would have cost, but this one I think he might have actually wanted in his home collection. But we don't know that, of course.
So what we know is that Shakespeare was an interested, curious person who incorporated a lot of the scientific, it wasn't science at that time, but these ideas about the world into his work and into his storytelling. But we still don't really know how much he personally believed and what was his real view on this stuff. Or what do you say that we do?
That's right. No, I think we'll never know his own personal beliefs. I mean, this is something scholars have struggled with, for a couple of centuries now. These days there's a flourishing Shakespeare industry, and new biographies come out all the time. And I had the pleasure of reading the good ones or the recent ones. Stephen Greenblatt, Jonathan Bate. There's a bunch of them now. Frank Kermode. There's a lot to choose from, and of course, what these scholars, I mean, they're at Harvard or Yale or Oxford, someplace where they're very bright people, but are they stymied by the fact that there are a lot of blanks in Shakespeare's bio? We just don't know what he did in his spare time and who he hung out with in any detail, right? So, is that a problem? Well, you just sort of try to make educated guesswork. His religious beliefs. Well, we don't know. His older siblings, let me think now. I think one of his older sisters was baptized as a Catholic. So does that prove anything? Well, not really. I mean, at that time, Mary was on the throne, and Mary was a Catholic, and you had to do that. Did his father have Catholic sympathies? There's a pretty good case to be made for that. By Shakespeare's time, there was a state religion, and it was the new Anglican religion, the Church of England. You had to go to church. If you didn't, you would be fined. But does that mean that he, did he pray? Did he believe? I mean, we just don't know. Towards the end of the book, And by the way, this has been argued, like every possible direction you could argue it has been argued, right? From he was a closet Catholic to he was a mainstream Protestant, Church of England, maybe even an apologist for the Tudor dynasty or something like that, right through to this idea that he was a closet atheist. Now there's actually, I could only find one book-length argument along those lines, but you do see it popping up in recent times. And in the final chapter, or maybe the final couple of chapters of my book, I sort of go into some speculation along these lines. There are some somewhat, I won't try to sum it up here, but there are scenes in certain plays where it just kind of looks like, well, if there's a God, he doesn't seem to be doing very much. He doesn't seem to be very concerned with human affairs, and you get that a little bit in King Lear. There's just a certain amount of bleakness to it. There's a certain kind of nihilism that kind of haunts the play. So that's something to ponder. But yeah, do we what can we say about his worldview or his beliefs? It's very difficult. In the end, we're speculating, but yeah, if we're lucky, we have sort of educated guesses or educated speculation. It would be fun. I will say this: it would be fun to have a time machine and go back there and maybe actually sit at the next table over in that tavern, in Bankside or Shoreditch or wherever he was hanging out that afternoon, and and eavesdrop on a few conversations. That would be pretty cool.
And now I know the question. If I get this time machine back there, now I know the right question to ask him. So, Bill, what do you read?
Yeah.
What's your reading list? I want to join your book club.
I think that's a great place to start, right? Because we know he read stuff, and it would be wonderful to know. Other than the ones I mentioned, the Ovid and the Montaigne and the Hollinshead, like what else did he read? That would be a great place to begin. And then if you want to get more controversial, you could ask him like, hey, so did you write all those plays by yourself, or did you anyway? But, and by the way, he did have collaborators. Toward the end of his career, he had a co-author for Henry VIII and a couple of the other late plays. So, some of the later plays he worked with John Fletcher and a few other people. So, yeah, it's interesting. We think of Shakespeare as this great genius, but playwriting was largely a collaborative effort, and it was also a commercial venture, and that's important to understand too. Shakespeare was one of the first writers who actually earned a living from his writing. He wasn't writing because he was in the church and he was copying Bibles. He wasn't writing because the king or the queen employed him to do it. He was writing as a private commercial venture, and that's kind of interesting in its own right.
I think other aspects of this book, looking through this, I think it would be so fun to take this book into a high school English class or into a science class, and start to use it as a basis for a lesson, to try and get people to, at a young age, to start digging more deeply into the writing of Shakespeare, because we know everyone in high school at some point has had to read a Shakespearean play for their English class.
Had to? What do you mean had to?
It's part of the curriculum. There's always a Shakespeare. There's Romeo and Juliet is in there, and then there's Hamlet, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why
That's
not?
right.
Why not try and bridge the arts, and this is, I think, a great stepping stone for being.
Yeah, maybe try to bridge the arts and the sciences a little bit. I think that's an important point. Thinking back to when I was in school, and this was certainly true in university as well, the arts and the sciences basically didn't overlap. So now I was lucky. First I was a physics major, but I took some English courses and a music course and stuff like that as electives. But you didn't have to. You could actually get through school. If you were a science major, you could have just a minimum. You had to get a writing credit of some kind, but you could have a minimal exposure to the arts. And I think vice versa too. The art students, of course, they have to get their science credit, but you could do it so that it was minimal.
Minimal,
and I think
yeah.
I think that's a shame, and I think people ought to be aware that this division of the various disciplines is kind of a new idea, right? It goes back maybe a century or maybe two at the most, but in Shakespeare's time, it was all very much intertwined. And you only have to go back about a century before that to get to Leonardo da Vinci, who of course was a jack of all trades. I mean, he was neither more nor less of an artist than he was an architect or an inventor. Didn't write for publication, but he was taking detailed notes, explaining his ideas in very vivid language. So he was really doing everything. And Shakespeare, well, I mean, again, I know I said this before, I'm not saying Shakespeare was a scientist, but he was engaged in the world in this very comprehensive way, so that if something, I mean, he was devouring these writings of the ancient Greek or Latin writers and his French and English contemporaries, but ideas about the world and ideas about the human body and ideas about like geography and the new world. I mean, that becomes very important in a play like The Tempest. All these ideas sort of operate together in Shakespeare's mind. So it's really interesting. And yeah, so sometimes I'm a little bit sad that we've just so completely, severed any connection between art and science. It would be nice. It would be nice to occasionally try to bring them back together.
Bring them back together and enter a new age of enlightenment, perhaps.
Maybe.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Dan. It's just been wonderful talking with you and hearing about your views on Shakespeare and getting it. It's just really neat to hear about the bard as someone with this deeper, richer character and an interest in the natural world around him and how that was expressed through his plays.
Yeah, it's very much my pleasure to be here, and I hope people who get a chance to look at the science of Shakespeare find something valuable and worthwhile in it. I know I had fun writing it, and I had definitely had fun tonight talking with you guys about it.
Where can people find you, or find a link to the book if they're interested?
Oh, well, a great place to start, if I may humbly mention my own website, it's
Sure.
danfalk.ca. I guess some other guy had the .com. So anyway, I've got the .ca. CA means Canada. Danfalk, DANFALK. And once you're there, you can just click on books, and there's a little write-up of Science of Shakespeare, and also my two previous books. And yeah, there you go. And for people who decide to take the plunge, of course, Amazon or your favorite retailer will have a thing where you can just click on it and pick up a copy. I think there's an audio book too. I don't know those details off the top of my head, but there is an audio book. Sorry, not an audio book, electronic edition like Kindle or such. So yeah, a few choices out there. And gosh, if people want to follow me on Twitter, it's just Dan Falk, so that's easy to do. And yeah, there you go.
Wonderful. So for everyone out there, The Science of Shakespeare, Dan Falk, check it out. Highly recommended. Thank you once again. And
Thanks, Dan.
yeah,
Thank
it
you.
was wonderful having you on the show. Have a good night.
Thank you. You too.
You too. So we have a few more stories. Do you want to run through some headlines?
Oh my
Justin?
goodness! Now we're gonna shuffle off this.
You want to shuffle off this mortal coil of a shrug off?
Yeah. This one caught my ear. This is plants responding to leaf vibrations caused by insect chewing. So this is previous studies have suggested that plant growth can be influenced by sound and vibration. So you touch a plant, you have a fan on it, you play music to it. Now researchers at the University of Missouri, in a collaboration that brings together audio and chemical analysis, have determined that plants respond to the sounds that caterpillars make when they're eating plants. And when the plant hears this, it responds with more defense.
Right, more chemical defenses, right?
Chemical defenses. Previous research has looked into this sort of thing with the music and everything. This is the first time they've seen an example of plants actually responding to the sound of a predator. What this is remarkable is that the plants exposed to different vibrations, including those made by a gentle wind or a different insect sound, that share some acoustic features with caterpillar feeding vibrations, did not increase their chemical defenses. So they are able to distinguish between feeding vibration from the caterpillar and something else that has a similar frequency or a similar amount of just vibration.
But isn't going to hurt them.
But
like
isn't
wind.
going to eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is really interesting. They placed this on a Rapidopsis. That's we got that growing in the kitchen there.
Yeah.
Very small flowering plant. Gosh, it's a really small plant to put a caterpillar on. At least mine haven't grown much.
They'll grow a little bit more.
They used lasers.
Laser interferometers, yeah.
Tiny piece of reflective material on the leaf to measure the movement of the leaf in response to the chewing caterpillar. Yeah, so really interesting. Later, they played back recordings of caterpillar feeding to one set of plants, but played back only science to other set of plants. As the control, when the caterpillars later fed on both sets of plants, researchers found that the plants previously exposed to the feeding vibrations produced more mustard oil, the chemical that is both unappealing and untasty to many caterpillars.
I wonder how long that kind of a response lasts. So they're fed on, or their neighbors are being fed on, and they hear the sounds, or the vibrations vibrate the plants in a particular way. So it's not hearing with an ear, but the vibrations are very, very lightly shaking the plant in a particular way, and the plants respond to it by upregulating. So how much does that upregulation of mustard oil last? Is it long-lasting? Is it a short thing? But just the amazingness of plants reacting to feeding vibrations is
having
mind-blowing.
Having a plant memory of some sort.
A plant memory, yeah.
On hand to apply to the nefarious predator.
Yeah. Fish have memories too.
What?
Yeah, so a study of the African cichlid, it's a little fish, lives in many African lakes. It's highly studied by scientists around the world. Well, it's been a long time thought that fish, with their little tiny brains, wouldn't have very good memories or long memories. And I remember like an Annie DeFranco song from the mid-'90s, talking about the memory of a goldfish being only a few seconds.
Oh, right. It's only lasts as it goes around, and it's gone again, right?
Yeah, and then it's gone again. But this does not make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all. You're living in an environment where food is in wonderful, plentiful supply in one season. The next season, not so plentiful. And so you have to remember where you fed or where you have found food. Researchers just recently published a study in the Society for, it's presented, it hasn't been published yet, it's been presented at the Society for Experimental Biology, their annual meeting that was just recently held, and they presented data that suggest that some of these fish were able to remember for up to 12 days. And that was, the extent of the study, but yes, African cichlids can remember. Fish have memories. Fish have memories. Plants have memories. There's another cool plant story. Some Central and South American plants have their male flower parts have been they're kind of fruity looking. Birds foraging go yummy, fruity, but really the fruit is near a bellows type contraption that has evolved in these plants. And when the birds come up to feed from the plant, the bellows are squeezed and they shoot pollen at the birds' faces.
Ha!
And then the birds go foraging further and they drop the pollen from their faces into the other plant's female parts, and thus you have pollination. And this is one of the only examples that researchers have found of a blasting pollination attempt.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And then I had a really amazing, just, this is, I wish Blair were here to talk about this story, actually. This story about the bonehouse wasp. The bonehouse wasp.
Yeah.
This is a new species that's been recently described. It's not a new species. It's been around for a while, but
Makes
we
a
are
nest out of the
Yes.
corpses of its food, its prey, or does it
No,
even eat
not of its prey. Ants uh, release formic acid and other compounds, and thus are kind of stinky. It can be very stinky, and when animals or insects attack ants, usually they release the formic acid to try and repel other animals. And they're a spider wasp, this bonehouse wasp, so named because in front of their nest there's an antechamber that they fill with the corpses of dead ants.
Wow.
And researchers think this is to use the scent that emanates from the dead ants to repel potential predators from eating its babies.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. Yeah. These bonehouse wasps are found in southeast China, and this research is published in the Public Library of Science 1. Yeah. Bonehouse wasps, Deuterogenia ossarium. So it actually has a reference to bonehouse in its scientific name, which is beautiful. I applaud it. Did you have any other stories you wanted to blurb?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Cassini. Go looking for the 10-year anniversary pictures of from Cassini's mission to Saturn. It's the 10-year anniversary. Lots of great pictures on the interwebs for you to find. Additionally, recently, NASA just launched the OCO2, which is going to be studying the Earth's respiration, looking for sources of carbon dioxide on the planet and also sinks or repositories for carbon dioxide on the planet, looking to find out how our planet breathes. An Earth-like planet was found 16 light years away, so not that far in galactic scale. 16 light years away. It's pretty big. It orbits its sun in something like 16 days or something. It's a very, very short orbital period. But its sun is really dim, so it potentially receives the same amount of heat energy from its sun as we do from ours. However, they do think it's a very dense planet and that it might have a runaway greenhouse effect going on and be very kind of Venusian. But that is yet to be determined. And finally, Hubble has detected 2 Kuiper Belt objects out beyond Pluto that we may be sending the New Horizons mission to. After it passes Pluto. So things to be on the lookout for in the science stories that are to come. I would like to thank all of our wonderful Patreon supporters for supporting us on patreon.com. Thank you so much. I really couldn't do this without you. On next week's show, we're going to be broadcasting once again live at 8 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time on twis.org/live. You can watch and join our chat room there. But don't worry if you can't make it there. You can also catch the past episode at youtube.com/thisweekinscience or the audio version at twis.org. Don't forget to tell a friend about TWIS and check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/thisweekinscience.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope you've enjoyed the show. TWIS is also available as a podcast. Just Google This Week in Science in your iTunes directory. Or if you have a mobile device, you can look for TWIS 4 Droid app in the Android marketplace or TWIS, TWIS, in the Apple marketplace.
For more information on anything that you've heard here today, show notes are going to be available on our website, twis.org. You can also make comments there and start conversations with the hosts and other listeners.
Yes, or you can contact us directly. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or Blair at blairbaz@twist.org. Just be sure to put TWIS, TWIS, somewhere in the subject line, or your email will be spam filtered into oblivion. And we will never get to talk to you. You can also hit us up on the Twitter, where we are at TWIS Science, at Dr. Kiki, at JacksonFly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, please let us know.
And we'll be back here next week once more, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from today's show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. This week in science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth, and I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. And This Week in Science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say. And if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. So how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.
And that, my friends, is the end of the show. Curtain and scene. Exit stage left even. Justin has turned off his camera. He waved as if he was really leaving, but I don't know if he was just taking a break.
I am. I'm going. I'm going to go back to bed. But it has been fun.
It has been fun. I'm glad you were here for the show. I'm sorry you haven't been feeling well.
I got some weird Alaskan virus.
Alaska? Who went to Alaska and brought a virus back?
The girls.
Ugh.
They brought some drizzly bug, some moose virus.
Moose virus.
Gosh, that whole thing.
Exactly. Yeah, so next week, no Blair again, and you'll be cool. Thumbs up.
Oh yeah, should be fine. No problems.
Also, if we and there's a new story out, I don't know if you've seen it, that says that people who read Boing Boing are specifically on the NSA watch list. So.
Wait, what?
There's potential news brewing, folks who are watching still. We're talking with Boing Boing currently about distributing This Week in Science through the Boing Boing Podcast Network. And I just thought it was really funny to find a story today saying that Boing Boing readers are being watched by the NSA.
They're being specifically targeted?
Specifically targeted. So I'm just putting it out there before this deal goes through. We might end up on a watch list for reals.
Well, you can join me. I think I've already been there.
You're already done. Yeah, you've done it a long time ago.
I've already been on the list. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be awesome. I would be proud to be watched by the NSA if it
Right?
were because I was a part of Boing Boing.
We give them some tips on security. Go. Don't give the level tech
Wait, Ben Rothig, you don't know what Boing Boing is?
everything.
Look for Boing Boing. Look up Boing Boing.
I think it's a mattress manufacturing company.
Yeah, Boing Boing, not Boink Boink.
But is now going to be sponsoring live shows and mattress factories. I think that's how.
Yes. Yes. I don't know. I think they used to have a subheading saying something like a repository of wonderful things or something, a directory of wonderful things, which I loved. Boing Boing's a great website. I love it. NSA says it only banks the communications of targeted individuals. Guess what? If you read Boing Boing, you've been targeted. SMB in Florida. Whoops. Guess I'm on 4 watch lists now. Good for you. Congratulations. You're going big. We should have a competition. How many watch lists can you end up on? Yes. Maker of fun trampolines. Yes, Identity 4. Absolutely.
Was it a trampoline? It's a trampoline company, not a mattress company? Okay.
Yeah. It's a trampoline company. Sword and Laser. Yeah, Gord McLeod. Sword and Laser is part of the Boing Boing Network. Exactly. Great podcast by Tom Merritt and Veronica Belmont, if you have not heard it. About books related to science fiction and fantasy. Get it? Sword and Laser. Or I guess fantasy and science fiction. That way around. Excellent. What else is going on? 4th of July is tomorrow. Fireworks. For those of you in the United States, happy 4th of July. Everybody else out there, happy 4th of July.
Oh, yeah.
Just because it'll be the 4th of July tomorrow and not the 3rd or the 5th. But
it already is in some places in the Americas.
Yes. In some places in the Americas, it is already 4th of July. You're right.
Down with the British.
Happy 4th of July! It is kind of fun that Facebook is going potentially the British government will be fining or attempting legal recourse against Facebook for something that was released close to the 4th of July. Haha, take that, American technology. Yeah. Good night, Dan Falk. Yes, Mooncat. Cory Doctorow is a bit activisty. Have you read his books? I read Little Brother. I haven't read the sequel. But
I'm still trying to figure out what the scandal with the Google and Facebook, the hiring demographics at the company. Has anybody seen this or heard this but not seen it?
I don't know what you're talking about. Mm-mm.
There was like this big thing about how, it's mostly white people that work at Facebook and Google.
Wait, say that again?
That it was mostly white males that worked at Facebook and Google.
Oh, yeah, that's true of most of the technology sector, actually.
Right? So there's that. But actually, if you looked at it, what was interesting was it was smaller percentage than is in, not of males, but smaller percentage of whites than is in the general population. It was like really heavily Asian on top of white. So I'm like wondering what like how do you go in and say there's too many Asian people working at Google? Like how do you pull that up if you can find it? It was being made to be like there's no diversity in a global company, blah blah blah.
I don't know. They hire people who they think are going to do a good job. I don't know.
Well, and also like
they have certain criteria.
It being largely male.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. I don't want to be too.
But I think that's also that's also an effect of fewer women going into computer sciences in general in college.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Like
fewer women are getting degrees that will enable them to get those jobs that.
I've been in the computer science lab, okay? It's a lot like the AV lab, okay? It's largely like the chess club or robot club. There's not a lot of girls in there. It's not where you don't join those clubs to meet girls. You just don't.
No.
I don't know. I thought it was like, anyway, maybe it wasn't, maybe it didn't make big Bay Area news, San Francisco news. It was like the front page of some stupid newspaper around here. But you looked at the demographics that they were saying, and like sideways, all they could really be saying is that there's just too many Asian people working at. Because it was that was the only number that was really higher than the population of, the United States at large. It's like, what are you? And, the fact that everything's based in and around the Bay Area. Actually, there was a larger percentage of women. I would have expected it to be like 90% guys, but it wasn't that off.
It's not that off.
Yeah, it wasn't nearly that off.
No, it's not that bad, but it's bad, and it's definitely not even.
No, what's bad about it? Wait a second, why is it bad?
There is a disproportionate number. There is a disproportionate number of women going into computer sciences and those kinds of fields generally, which means that for some reason girls are turned off to it from a young age. And there are reports of these kinds of departments being very insular and pro-male, and that even girls trying to get into it, it's kind of hard to get through the bro thing. And so once you even try, you kind of have to fight past this barrier of joining the boy club. So there are barriers in the way of women just even getting into studying this stuff in the first place. But I think people are working really hard to change that currently, which is
maybe there's barriers in the way of them being interested in doing it too, though. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't want to be sexist about it and say that, because I don't really think there's things one gender is necessarily better at doing. Definitely don't believe that. But in general, I can say that there's gender specific interests and stuff. I bet you if you took This Week in Tech. If you took a look at their audience, right? I guarantee you it's mostly white and mostly male.
Our audience is mostly white and mostly male.
Our audience here even, yeah. This Week in Science, mostly white and mostly male. Should we start?
We try to branch out. We've actually improved our. We've gone from about 80% male to about 70% male recently, which.
Oh, we're slipping. Okay, so we got it.
Pretty awesome. Yeah, more women watching and listening.
You can't lose the one last good thing we've got.
We have improved in our show demographics, which is we're on a trajectory for improvement. No, I think also, yes, there are interests. People have interests. Why do they have certain interests in things? Well, sometimes it's just exposure. Sometimes it's, the way things are presented to someone. And, if a girl is given a computer with the opportunity to create her own computer program or an Arduino board with the opportunity to complete a circuit and program it to, blink lights or do something she wants it to do, maybe a girl is going to be more likely to be interested in that stuff. Maybe a boy not given that stuff would be less interested in those things. There's...
Well, I wonder, though, see, what I would think is...
Exposure is huge.
Exposure is huge, but I would also think, boy is thinking, I wonder if I could get a robot that would fire laser beams out of its eyes, and then start looking into electronics to see how that gets done. Mm-hmm. And then maybe only gets a blinky light to go, but it's like, there's my robot, right? Whereas I don't know that creating your own robot to destroy your enemies is something that girls think about. But every boy has fantasized about this, having your own robot to go and destroy your enemies.
I would like a robot. I don't know if I want it to destroy my enemies. Maybe I want it to, clean my house so I don't have to, and then I have more time for doing TWIS and making more robots.
And
that'd be awesome.
Thus the dishwasher was invented.
More robots. More computer programming. Yeah.
So back to this thing you're talking about, the boing thing.
The boingy boing boing. Yes.
Yeah. What do we have to do different? We have to we get more ads or something that we have to read?
We will potentially be putting ads into our podcast. So we will read advertisements.
Okay. So it just makes that longer middle part of the show.
Not necessarily. It depends on the number of ads, and we can. The Audible spot is one that we can boot Audible if there's something more lucrative there.
But Audible's been there for so long.
It's been there for so long. I know. But we can. So I think that there will be advertisements related to distributing on the Boing Boing network.
So it would be stuff we'd read, though. It wouldn't be stuff that just somebody would go to look at the podcast later, and an ad would play, and then...
No, we'd read it, yeah. Yeah.
And then people would still find our show at TWIS.org?
Yeah. So as far as I'm aware, we would not have to change anything.
So what?
But it will simply be distributed. We will run ads for their ad network, and we will be distributed through their network.
But how?
That's what I get so far from them. So we'll see. It sounds all above board and really awesome.
Oh, I'm sure. Actually. I'm sure. Boing Boing's awesome. I just don't know. Does that mean, from now on, you're going to have to simply Boing Boing This Week in Science in your iTunes directory? Will I have to?
That's right. Boing Boing us in your iTunes directory. No, I don't know. Yeah, I have to. These are things I have had one conversation with Mark, and I'm looking forward to having many more with him and figuring out how all the details work. But it sounds Sounds really, really great. So, and I really like Boing Boing and always have. And um, it would be cool. I was talking with Tom Merritt about how neat it would be to be on the same podcast network and then like cross promote our podcasts. So,
Is he
we
a
could.
boinger?
He's a Boing Boing podcaster now,
Boinger.
and yeah,
Okay. Well, it sounds intriguing.
sounds intriguing. So I'm going to find out more details as they come, but this is something that is, it's a conversation, and I don't know. I'm intrigued and interested, and I'm hoping that everything is good.
Yeah. Yeah, there we go. All right, Kiki, I gotta go. I'm
Go to
fading
sleep.
back,
Yeah,
back
go
into
take care
sleep.
of yourself. Go take care of yourself. I'm gonna keep playing with my teleprompter here.
Could totally be brought to everybody by Pedialyte for rehydrating after explosive diarrhea. I always reach
Too much
for
information.
Pedialyte.
Oh, I gotta watch out for those
I didn't even notice this. This says
viruses.
pre-active prebiotics.
Has
Really? I know it had the electrolytes, but it's been updated.
has
And cherry punch.
prebiotics now.
Have to go cherry punch. This is my new jam, though. I'm gonna just drink this all the time now. This stuff is.
Pedialyte is pretty awesome stuff.
I don't know if there's a limit to how many of these you're supposed to drink in a day.
Mm,
If there's any warnings.
hey, don't drink too many.
I don't know how many that is.
Yeah, hot rod, chicken soup. Have some chicken soup.
1 to 2 liters a day.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, replicant. We're sorry you missed the show
run.
too, but it'll be available for you. Just
Oh, but
not
that's only
much.
2 of these a day. Oh, I might be a little over.
Is that for a
I'm
certain
thinking that
weight
means a
range or
24-hour period. Might be a little over.
maybe that's why you have diarrhea. No. Never mind. All right, everybody.
Right,
We're into the
I'm going back to delirious, fever-filled dreams, which
Go-
makes no sense.
go
But
back to
apparently they've been
delirious.
going forever.
Yeah, go back to your delirium. I hope you feel a lot better and are able to have a nice 4th of July tomorrow and that you enjoy fireworks.
Down with the Brits.
Down with the Brits this time tomorrow. And what else was I going to say? Oh, yeah, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will be back here next week, 8 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. So far, no interviews or other co-hosts scheduled, but maybe we're missing a Blair, so maybe I should try and find somebody to fill the animal corner with goodness. We could try this. Yeah?
Yeah, we can replace Blair.
There's let's see, who do I know? We could, for animal corneriness, Karen Bondar.
Animal corniness.
Animal corniness. Yeah. We could Karen Bondar. She's doing stuff for Discovery Network now, but she did some stuff on wild sex, so her stuff is very animal cornery. And kind of in the same vein of Blair's interests.
You just find Blair's interests. It's wild sex. Blair.
Yeah. Anybody, if you have suggestions, just let me know. I will contact people and see if we can get a third co-host, for this show next week. Otherwise, it's just me and Justin. Like,
spot over here.
what, you getting bald right there?
So look at that. Or I think it's white hair.
You have so much hair. Otherwise, like it's.
Yeah, but it's like extra. Like this side doesn't do it. Like this side doesn't have it back up in here. This side, maybe I'm supposed to do it. I'm parting on the wrong side then, maybe.
Maybe you need more of that hair stuff? That spray-on hair stuff? Shh.
I need a new
Spray it
cat.
on.
I need a new toupee.
Schwood is a great idea, Gord. I love that idea.
Okay, good night, everybody. I'm gonna fall
Sorry for
asleep.
destroying your night, Goldizator. Sorry for the
Alright.
TMI at the end of the show here, everyone. Justin's gonna get some sleep, and I'll figure out a co-host for next week. And thanks everyone for watching, hanging out with us, being in the chat room. Yeah, no one can replace Blair, Marianne. It is so true. It is so true. But we will be back next week, and we hope that you'll join us again. Bye! I'm all alone here, except for you guys.